It's been well understood for a very long time that Rachel Reeves has absolutely no chance of being Chancellor next week.
Now let's get some analysis on the key political stories from Lara Spirit, the Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times. You were on with me yesterday. We talked through Andy Burnham's speech came on when I was broadcasting. How do we feel about it sort of almost 24 hours afterwards? How's it landed?
Well, it's landed very well with the party, I think it's fair to say. It's landed very well with those who were pretty happy to see the back of Keir Starmer. Many of those who are quite pensive about what might come next, I think, probably didn't change their general feeling on account of that speech yesterday. But I do think there were a number of notable things and indications in that speech, particularly, for example, on working with other parties. What he said about seeking common ground, trying to move beyond, toxic language, and how that had been sort of inculcated by bad relations between political parties. And I think it's interesting thinking about what kinds of areas he might try and seek consensus on with different party leaders. But generally, of course, it was a pretty triumphant moment for Andy Burnham, who was crowned leader of the Labour Party without, of course, a contest. The big moment, of course, will come on Monday when he becomes Prime Minister, at which point people will be expecting him to outline some quite significant changes in detail, about which we heard relatively little of on Friday.
Yes, I mean, I got the feeling talking it through with Anna Mihailova and others, that this was very much a speech to the Labour Party. It was like a mini Labour Party conference. It was held at the TUC. So the people who were texting in during the show saying it was kind of vague and amorphous, they had a point, I think, but they also, one could argue from Andy Burnham's perspective that the concrete and crunchy comes when he's actually the Prime Minister. And of course, the first thing, he'll give a speech in Downing Street around lunchtime, I gather. And then he'll presumably set about appointing his cabinet, and it's the greatest Westminster insider gossip game when there's a cabinet reshuffle going on, not least when you've got a new Prime Minister.
Have you played the game where you put in the various names you think will be in the various jobs?
No, you know what, I'm so sad I'm going to go home and do that this afternoon. I'm going to take down my World Cup wall chart.
Yeah, it's time.
Why hasn't I hope the Sunday Times is going to have a glossy cabinet wall chart.
That's actually a great idea. And
you can swap wipe clean one, so you can wipe out the names as they change. But the first gossip game is Miliband versus Mahmood. Weirdly, I'm pro Miliband, partly because I think having a big beast on the inside, whole of government approach, but I think it's pretty nailed on for Shabana Mahmood.
You don't think Shabana Mahmood is a big beast?
I think she's great. I think she's a fantastic Home Secretary. I think she's one of the best people in that team. Anyway, she looks nailed on for Chancellor from all the vibes this morning in terms of how...
I think the vibes of recent days. I mean, it was Tuesday morning. Steve Swinford, Patrick Maguire and I were doing our podcast and we're all getting calls suggesting that actually it looked like Ed Miliband, or at least those who have wanted to see Ed Miliband fail in his quest to become Chancellor, felt pretty triumphant, pretty confident at that point that had been secured as an outcome. Of course, it's worth saying these ministers don't necessarily know their own fate, but at this point, by Tuesday, it looked pretty likely that Ed Miliband was not going to be walking into number 11 next week. The fate of Shabana Mahmood is, of course, very interesting. She, I reported weeks ago that senior advisors to Burnham were lobbying her to consider the role of Chancellor, and she has long maintained that she wanted to remain in the Home Office, that her immigration reforms are very dear to her, and I think she's been persuaded, particularly in Makerfield, when she was up in the constituency where Andy Burnham was campaigning to re-enter Parliament as an MP. I think she was persuaded by her visits there that actually, Burnham does back the thrust of her reforms and would be loyal to her in that endeavour. But of course, who takes that job of Home Secretary is actually one of the great mysteries at the moment for journalists, because although it looks like we have a pretty good idea of who might be in number 11, for example, now, or at least who will definitely not be in number 11, I think it's becoming a lot less certain who will be in jobs like, for example, the Home Office job, the Home Secretary.
And I even read, it may indeed have been in our own dear Times, that there's talk of Rachel Reeves, obviously she would leave being Chancellor, but staying in the cabinet, which sounds slightly odd.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think that's long been maintained that they would demote her, but I don't think they would be expecting not to offer her a job in this government. I think it's been well understood for a very long time that Rachel Reeves has absolutely no chance of being Chancellor next week. I mean, we reported it, I think, maybe a month ago. That is not the direction that Andy Burnham will be going in. But I don't think, they don't want to insult her. I don't think they're going to come in and attack her legacy and say that she was an absolutely awful Chancellor and the reason why many things failed under Starmer. I don't think they'll take that approach at all. But I do think they need to signal, or they definitely want to signal that there will be a change in direction and that they will need a new Chancellor to be able to do that. So I really would not be surprised if you see Rachel Reeves offered a different job next week, but it is very much a mystery as to which post she may be offered.
And is there a feeling as well in terms of the big beasts that you have to offer stuff to Angela Rayner and to Wes Streeting?
I think so. Yeah, I think you do. I think there's an understanding that you probably do. I think for a long time, Wes Streeting has been mooted for various different senior positions. I think that actually genuinely the grid of which is signalling who might be in these positions has changed. So at one point, for example, he was penciled in as Foreign Secretary. I think that's no longer very likely at all. But whether or not, for example, he could return to health, is that possible? We don't know. It looks like, if you read the Telegraph this morning, that Angela Rayner, for example, is a front runner to become Health Secretary. So very interesting to see how that will play out. But certainly you can definitely expect a return, I think, of those two figures.
And again, without wishing to sound sort of too insidery and Whitehall-y, I mean, there's an interesting debate going on about scrapping government departments. There's the government department DSIT, the Department for Science, Information and Technology, I think it is, which was kind of carved out of the Department of Culture, which weirdly had built up a huge digital brief. And that's causing a bit of a row because the idea is it be rolled into the Department of Business, but the tech community are saying, no, DSIT's doing a good job. It gives a focus to tech if it's just rolled into the big business department, which Jonathan Reynolds, who used to run it, is mooted to come back to run it again. You'll lose that kind of focus on tech. Is this a big debate doing the rounds at the moment?
It is, yes. It is born out of a story in the Financial Times yesterday. I think it's fair to say it has hugely alarmed many people in the tech sector in particular. I think also it's alarmed a lot of people in and around Westminster who are concerned about the amount of energy and time that goes into government reorganisations more broadly. There's a number of things that Andy Burnham wants to do that we've read about. For example, a beefed up PM department. We already know that he's doing number 10 North, for example, which will be a massive undertaking if indeed he does choose to bestow it with genuinely significant powers. That would be a really big thing to do, and to do a massive multi-department reorganisation, which of course this would entail, because I think, if I'm correct, other parts would be going to DCMS as well. So it's 3 departments that are involved in a massive government change. Those things take years, they take a lot of money. You have some civil servants that are good that will inevitably leave because they'll feel dispirited by the change, and I think you have to be very certain that it's something that you necessarily want to do. So let's see. I think one of the key things now, obviously, is yes, you've had these very nascent access talks that have not lasted for very long at all, because we've had such a short transition between key members of the civil service and key members of the Burnham administration. But next week, of course, will be the moment at which, Burnham fully collides with the machinery of the state and is able to truly seek the counsel of many people, as indeed will his newly appointed secretaries of state and later on, of course, his junior ministers. I think that some of these plans that are sort of under consideration now will obviously change with the advice, you will imagine, of the civil service, and my suspicion is that this might be one of them. And
just back to personalities, Lisa has texted in, no mention anywhere of Peter Kyle. Thoughts? ? I mean, there was a list of some pretty senior cabinet ministers who've become quite well established. Peter Kyle is a very good example of that, who will, it seems, inevitably go on the back benches. I
don't think we know anything that is inevitable at this point, just because, I mean, you heard Andy Burnham, first of all, yesterday saying he hadn't made any decisions about his cabinet, and then I think later said that he was finalising or would finalise decisions this weekend. I think that there is a well-placed assumption that, shall we say, some of those key loyalists or so-called Blairites, I don't want to be too crude with my description of some of these ministers, but there are people, for example, like Liz Kendall, who is of course the current science secretary. Peter Kyle, of course, is another key cabinet minister that people would probably expect to be out come next week. Also Lord Hermod, the Attorney General, key, possibly Starmer's closest ally in government, not expected to follow in the same position under Andy Burnham either. And so I think broadly those are those that you might consider are less well placed to stay in post next week. There are also questions around, for example, Darren Jones, who
was effectively sort of deputy quasi-deputy prime minister. He wasn't technically.
Well, and sort of chief secretary to the prime minister, and has played a number of very important roles in this government in particular. I think has been very helpful during the Burnham transition. So, is known to have had conversations with Louise Haigh, who is of course very influential in this process, particularly around making sure the budget preparations were ongoing. Whether he will survive next week, I think, will be a very interesting question. So there are those question marks over.
He was even mooted as a leadership candidate at one point.
There was a period where there were some people in the parliamentary party who had been sort of urging him to run. He, of course, did not do so, nor did, of course, Wes Streeting, the former health secretary. So I think, of course, will be interesting to see whether or not Darren Jones continues. But my sense is that he's been pretty helpful during this period, and there had been, I think, until relatively recently, quite a well-placed assumption that he might continue. But let's see.
Oh, just very quickly, I forgot. We talked earlier about the fact that Andy Burnham favours the return of the Parthenon sculptures, otherwise known as the Elgin marbles. Is that going to emerge
Declare
as a
your
massive...
interest.
I declared it earlier, but I am chair of the Parthenon project. This could emerge as a massive political issue that could define his premiership.
Thank you for saying that. It could emerge as the defining political issue, not just of his times, but of our times. Let's see what he says on that, and how soon it will take before he's pressed on it. I don't know. I mean, look, he's not answered a huge number of political questions recently. As soon as more broadcasters and
how
journalists
much do I have to pay you to ask him at the next press when he finally starts to take questions from the press, of course, which is equally uncertain.
He did do some yesterday, but of course, yes, there was. I think we speak about how we know more about his tea habits at this point than
yes, it's a gift. It's a gift to your tabloid colleagues, of course, because the minute he says that they should go home, they'll just write Burnham has lost his marbles. So there you go. Lara Spirit, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times, thank you so much for coming on and giving us the latest political news. And of course, you'll be able to read what Lara has written for the Sunday Times. If you've got a digital subscription, you'll be able to read it on your app early this evening before you settle down for the England-France game. Or you can go buy a copy of the newspaper tomorrow morning.